Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deep Research Podcast.
Great to be here.
Today we are jumping into, a deep dive into a stack of sources covering some really unprecedented events unfolding in the Middle East.
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking about the recent intense military actions between Israel and Iran.
Intense is maybe an understatement.
Definitely. What we've seen over the last few days, based on the reports we're digging into, is a huge escalation. Israel undertaking what the sources are calling a massive, coordinated air campaign.
Right, but it wasn't just that, was it? It was layered on top of some pretty wild ground sabotage stuff.
Oh yeah, truly remarkable ground sabotage operations that reportedly happened deep inside Iran.
Right, I saw one source use the phrase, Israel just went ham on Iran today,
Huh, yeah.
which, it really gives you a sense of the sheer scale and how surprising it was.
Totally. It wasn't just planes in the sky. There was this incredibly detailed, almost like cinematic ground thing.
Uh-huh.
Operatives apparently already inside the country just waiting. Wow. Okay, so our mission here in this deep dive, what are we trying to do?
Right, so we really want to unpack these sources for you.
Right.
Cut through the noise, pull out the really important nuggets of knowledge.
Okay.
We're trying to understand how these incredibly complex operations reportedly unfolded, look at the reported battle damage, on both sides, what got hit, what was destroyed,
Makes sense.
and explore what this whole intense exchange might mean for the balance of power in the region.
And critically, right, see what the potential involvement from other players might be, like the U.S.
Exactly. See what the reporting says about potential U.S. involvement specifically.
So think of this as your shortcut, maybe, to getting up to speed on a situation that's moving super fast and it's highly complex.
Yeah, we're distilling these reports, analyses, maybe some official statements that are captured in the material we've got.
Trying to help you understand it quickly, but, thoroughly.
And we have a really interesting mix of sources here. Detailed accounts that seem like they're coming from intelligence assessments of the operations themselves.
Right.
Battle damage reports using things like satellite images, radar data, and then analysis trying to make sense of the political side, the implications, potential next steps in this, escalating conflict.
Okay, let's unpack this incredible story then, the Israeli operation. Because according to these sources, it wasn't just one thing, right? It was multi-layered, with a clear goal from the get-go.
Yes, the apparent goal, based on what we're reading, was multifaceted. But the main focus, it really seemed to be on crippling Iran's ability to retaliate.
How so?
Specifically targeting their air defense systems and trying to, eliminate key leadership figures.
Ah, okay.
The strategic thinking, as it's described, was basically degrade Iran's ability to shoot down planes, take out key decision makers.
And that would, what? Pave the way.
Exactly. Pave the way for subsequent bigger actions and maybe weaken the government's ability to respond effectively. Possibly even deal with the nuclear program threat more directly down the line.
And the way they reportedly did this on the ground, it's pretty wild. Sources detail a 3-phase ground sabotage operation?
That's it. And phase one apparently didn't just start last week.
Yeah.
It began way back, like 8 months ago.
8 months. With who?
With Israeli operatives from Mossad already inside Iran.
Mossad. So their main intelligence agency, right, for covert ops abroad.
That's the one. And these weren't new teams just arriving for this attack.
No.
According to the sources, these are operatives who had reportedly been living inside Iran, under deep cover, fake identities, for a long time.
Wow. So embedded.
Deeply embedded. The reports mention methods used in past Mossad ops, foreign passports, coming in as business people, journalists, aid workers, seemingly harmless roles. They'd apparently spent years building these cover stories, setting up lives before they got activated for something like this.
So they're just living there waiting for the call. And then over those months, they start bringing in the gear, drones, explosives.
Precisely. Bit by bit. The sources detail methods from previous actions, like hiding disassembled weapons inside fake plumbing stuff.
Seriously, plumbing?
Yeah, or built into car parts, hidden in household appliances even. They'd smuggle parts in separately, different routes, then reassemble them inside Iran, somewhere safe.
That's incredible coordination.
And there's even mention, potentially, of using things like 3D printers
For what?
to maybe fabricate smaller parts locally, so you don't need to smuggle bigger, more suspicious components. Just bring in raw materials or smaller bits.
That is absolutely fascinating, like building IKEA furniture, but it's, drones hidden inside washing machines.
Kind of, yeah. And they weren't doing this alone, were they? The reports say they coordinated with local assets inside Iran.
Right, locals helping out.
Absolutely crucial. Based on the reports, finding people inside Iran who are sympathetic, maybe they hate the regime or can be, incentivized somehow.
Makes sense.
These local assets are apparently vital for ground recon, watching security movements, and, crucially, moving the contraband around without raising red flags.
And historically, the sources mention Mossad has worked with certain groups.
Yeah, reportedly partnered with anti-regime ethnic minorities, like Kurds in the northwest, Balak rebels in the southeast. They control parts of those porous borders with Iraq, Pakistan, Afghanistan.
So potential entry points, safe havens for smuggling, movement.
Exactly. It gives them roots and cover.
Okay, so deep cover agents, gear smuggled in over months, local help. Then they reportedly modified ordinary civilian vehicles inside Iran.
Yes. And this is where it gets really interesting and, frankly, a bit wild.
Yes, so?
These everyday vehicles, sources suggest maybe trucks, smaller pickup trucks, not huge military things, were apparently turned into covert attack drone platforms.
Wow. Disguised.
Seemingly disguised to look just like regular civilian transport.
And these modified trucks weren't just hidden somewhere, they were parked near the targets.
Right. Parked at key locations, specifically within 20 kilometers of their targets.
And the targets were?
Iran's SAM sites. Surface-to-air missile sites.
Okay, so that tells us a couple of things, right? First, Israeli intelligence knew exactly where Iran's radar and anti-air systems were.
Which is a huge intelligence win in itself.
And second, the operatives on the ground, maybe with local help, got these disguised vehicles that close, within 20 kilometers past any security.
Yeah, penetrating whatever perimeter security was there to get within strike distance for the drones.
So they're right there, on the doorstep of Iran's air defenses, looking like ordinary trucks. And then Friday the 13th, boom.
That's what the sources say. Morning of Friday the 13th, drones activated remotely, or by the operatives, flew out the backs, sides of these vehicles, straight to their pre-programmed target.
Oh, focusing on?
Destroying the air defense assets. The goal was basically cripple Iran's air protection from the inside out before the main air attack even started.
Now, one source made an interesting comparison here. Said this tactic ground-launched drones from disguised platforms. Is literally exactly what we just saw Ukraine did with their drones in Russia like a week ago.
Yeah, that specific method, using converted civilian vehicles or ground platforms to launch drones covertly, we have seen that recently, especially in the Ukraine conflict.
Right.
It highlights maybe an emerging trend, weaponizing common logistics. But what the sources really emphasize makes this whole operation different, unprecedented, is Phase 2.
Which happened at the same time.
Reportedly happened simultaneously with those drone attacks.
And Phase 2 was the commando infiltration. This is what really sets it apart.
Precisely. While those drones from the trucks were hitting air defenses, a covert group of Israeli Special Forces commandos reportedly infiltrated central Iran.
Central Iran? How? The sources speculate.
Yeah, some speculation. Maybe stealth helicopters. Or perhaps even larger cargo planes that were reportedly seen operating over in Syria later that day. Which also raises questions about how they got out.
So, not just launching drones from afar. Elite boots on the ground, deep inside enemy territory. How did they even move around without getting caught?
Sources say they moved covertly, avoided local security, made their way to remote desert spots suitable for their mission.
And their mission was?
Find and destroy Iranian anti-air missile systems directly.
And they used that specific weapon system, the Spike.
Yes, Spike, non-line-of-sight missile launchers. Spike, NLOS.
NLOS, that's key, right?
Yeah.
Non-line of sight.
Exactly. You don't need to see the target directly to hit it. Sources say this system let the commandos operate from a pretty good range. They only need to get within about 30 kilometers of their targets.
Only 30 kilometers? I mean, that's still incredibly deep inside hostile territory for a small team. Sounds super risky.
It is risky, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the system's capabilities reportedly made it work. The commandos fired these munitions, they're basically remote control missiles, and could steer them mid-air right into the targets.
And they're hard to detect.
That's what's fascinating. Sources point out the low signature of Spike missiles. Not very loud when fired, low thermal signature. Much harder to detect, locate. Lets the teams fire from concealed spots and stay hidden.
So they could fire, guide it in, and the enemy wouldn't immediately know where it came from.
Pretty much. The system can do fire and forget, but sources suggest they used the mid-air guidance for pinpoint accuracy against specific missile systems.
And they're accurate?
Reports highlight incredibly high hit probability, like over 95%. And accuracy, margins of error less than a meter. ideal for knocking out specific, high-value targets like missile batteries from a distance after sneaking in behind the lines.
It really speaks to a very deliberate surgical approach, crippling the air defenses layer by layer. And then the big question for this phase, how did they get out? From deep inside Iran.
That's where the sources speculate a bit. The exact method isn't confirmed. But given Iran's air defenses would have been significantly weakened by Phase 1, maybe Phase 2 itself.
Helicopter extraction becomes more possible.
More feasible than before, yeah. The report also mentions those cargo planes seen over Syria later. Maybe they recovered the teams from there, or nearby. Still speculation based on the info, but getting them out safely would have been a huge challenge.
Okay, Phase 1, covert drone trucks hitting SAM sites. Phase 2, commandos infiltrating, hitting anti-air missiles with Spike and LOS, already huge, complex, focused on degrading defenses. But then Phase 3, which one source called potentially the most insane of them all.
And you can totally see why, based on the reporting. This phase reportedly involved Israeli undercover agents working since at least 2024. So even before the main 8-month timeline for Phase 1 agents.
Wow, what were they doing?
Secretly building a kamikaze drone base inside the heart of Tehran itself.
Wait, inside Tehran, not mobile launchers in the desert, not remote facilities, but built right there, under their noses.
Specifically, reportedly located on the outskirts of the city. That's what the sources suggest. Not some huge military complex, likely disguised. Maybe a house, a commercial building, placed strategically.
But inside, a hidden base launching kamikaze drones, that sounds incredible, hard to believe.
It's definitely audacious if the reporting holds up.
And these drones had specific targets programmed, high-value ones.
Yes. Primary military target mentioned is the nearby Iranian base of Esjabad.
Esjabad. Why that one?
Described in the sources as one of Iran's most protected, highly sensitive bases, because it reportedly houses a number of their long-range ballistic missile launchers, a direct threat to Israel.
So taking out those launchers would be a critical blow to their ability to strike Israel from far away.
Absolutely. It's a core part of their offensive capability. And sources also mention additional kamikaze drones from this urban base seem to target specific individuals.
Individuals? Like who?
Particular generals, scientists, believed to be living or working in Tehran.
How do you even pinpoint individuals like that? With drones from a city base?
The sources describe a chillingly precise method, reportedly studying movement patterns, daily routines of these top commanders, scientists over time.
Okay.
Then, using that intel to trick or lure key high-value people into gathering in the same place at a specific time for a meeting, whatever, creating a single target opportunity to eliminate multiple top figures at once with these drones.
So not just chance, actively manipulating movements or using known patterns to get them all together. That's, wow, next-level targeting.
That's the suggested method for targeting leadership from this base. And according to Israel's stated goals, as reported, the purpose across all these ground operations, phases 1, 2, 3, was specifically to nerf, severely degrade Iran's retaliatory capabilities.
Especially the missiles.
Particularly focusing on these surface-to-surface ballistic missiles, seen as the most likely weapon for a big counterstrike against Israel, based on past behavior.
And the sources note just this urban sabotage part, Phase 3, took a year of prep. A year just to get commandos and weapons in place.
Yes, highlights the incredibly long-term planning, the extensive groundwork for just this single, arguably most audacious part of the whole thing.
Underscores it wasn't spur of the moment. A deep embedded capability built over a long time, separate from the 8-month timeline for the Phase 1 guys. So you have this incredibly detailed, multi-phase ground sabotage, taking out air defenses, hitting leaders, hitting missile sites, all softening Iran's defenses. And sources say this was basically paving the way for what came next.
Correct. Once Iran's layered air defense network was reportedly hit hard by the ground ops, the drone swarms, the commando strikes it apparently cleared the path, significantly lowered the risk for the next step, a massive coordinated air campaign using traditional aircraft.
And massive is the word. The numbers are staggering, right?
They really are, based on initial reports. The campaign reportedly involved 200 Israeli fighter jets, mix of F-35s, F-16s, F-15s.
200 jets.
Initially, launching over 330 munitions across 5 distinct waves. Though the source notes that was an early estimate, final number of bombs, missiles dropped likely much higher as it went on.
That is an enormous undertaking. Where did they likely fly from? How'd they get into Iranian airspace with such a big force?
Likely route, sources say, was through Syria.
Syria, why there?
Yeah. Described as currently having limited, basically no effective air defense capabilities.
Yeah.
Because of the ongoing conflict there. makes it a relatively safe, open corridor for a big formation of Israeli jets to approach Iran.
Okay, and were they using standard tactics or anything notable about how they did the strikes?
A couple of tactical details stand out in the sources.
Yeah.
F-35s, the stealth jets, reportedly seen using external fuel tanks.
External tanks. Doesn't that reduce stealth?
It does, but it significantly extends range. Suggests either stealth wasn't paramount for parts of the mission, maybe because Iranian air defense was already degraded, or they just needed the extra range for deep strikes.
What kind of bombs?
Reportedly launched GBU-31 500-pound JDAM precision bombs. JDAMs are guidance kits, turn regular bombs into all-weather precision ones using GPS. Also use standoff missiles. Can be fired from up to 400 kilometers, about 250 miles away. Lets jets hit individual buildings deep inside Iran without flying right overhead. Minimizes exposure time.
And SEAD missions. Suppression of air defense.
Yes. Critical part of the air campaign, reportedly done alongside the bombing runs. SEAD missions are specifically designed to neutralize enemy air defenses. Reports state these missions destroyed around a dozen radars.
Taking out the eyes.
Exactly. Radars are vital for detecting incoming aircraft, guiding missiles. Taking them out further crippled Iran's remaining air defense after the ground sabotage. Goal was clear. Get air superiority, let the jets operate effectively with minimal threat.
And did they get it, based on the reports?
According to Israel's claims, presented in the sources, full control of the airspace during the main campaign, very little effective Iranian air defense activity reportedly seen in response to hundreds of incoming munitions.
And Iranian jets.
Sources state not a single Iranian jet was scrambled to intercept.
Wow, none.
Attributing this startling lack of air response to Iran's air force being essentially non-existent for many years, meaning they just didn't have functional planes or trained pilots capable of mounting a defense.
So the ground ops soften targets, CA takes out radars, and their air force can't even get off the ground. That's a remarkably effective, integrated strategy.
It certainly allowed Israeli jets to penetrate deep into Iranian airspace, hit a very wide variety of targets. Sources list over 100 different sites inside Iran hit during these initial waves. Military infrastructure, sensitive facilities.
Over 100 targets. What kind? All military?
First targets.
Yeah.
Strategic. Included well-known sites like the Natanz nuclear site, ballistic missile development, production facilities, especially around areas like Bid Kana, which has lots of missile stuff.
Okay, makes sense.
But what's also noted, and explicitly called an escalation, is that F-35s reportedly targeted and hit residential apartment buildings in Tehran.
Civilian residential building.
With precision bombs. That's a significant shift from past exchanges, if that's accurate. Sources present it as a notable escalation compared to past actions, where strikes were usually limited to military stuff. So you have military, nuclear, and apparently civilian targets hit simultaneously. Speaks to the intensity, the scope of this operation.
Really blurs the lines, and one source made a specific point about logistics and tactics here, so the line between them was blurred.
Yes, key takeaway analysis. Traditional view. Tactics are battlefield moves, logistics is background supply stuff.
Right.
But in this op, especially the ground sabotage with modified vehicles launching drones, building that hidden urban base, the transportation and preparation itself became the tactic.
Oh, I see.
Sources call it the weaponization of transportation systems, suggesting it's unlike anything seen before in military history in terms of scale, integration into a major coordinated op.
That's a really insightful way to see it. Not just what weapons, but how you discreetly get them deep inside enemy territory and deploy them. That becomes the innovative strategic part.
Absolutely. Elevates mundane logistics, moving vehicles, supplies into strategic attack vectors. Circumvents traditional defenses looking for military hardware coming by normal means.
Okay, let's shift gears. Iran's response, battle damage assessment. How did Iran's air defense hold up against the air campaign? What was left of it?
Well, according to sources, visual evidence during the Israeli air campaign showed Iran firing very old-school, antiquated anti-air flak.
Flak? Like from World War II footage?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Most common type reportedly seen was from systems like the Zu-23D2 twin 23mm anti-aircraft cannon. Mobile, relatively low-tech.
And their range.
Max effective range against aircraft. About 3 kilometers, roughly 1.8 miles. But the Israeli jets firing glide bombs, standoff metals, were reportedly flying much higher than that. Way out of range for this kind of flak.
So Iran was firing rounds into the sky that couldn't even reach the planes attacking them. That's
So yeah, almost theatrical, like you said. Ineffective. Source analysis suggests it is likely theatrical, partly. Presented as visual evidence that their more advanced long-range systems, The SAMs, the radar networks targeted by ground sabotage in Mossad, had indeed been destroyed or were useless.
Right.
Firing flak, even if it doesn't hit anything high up, provides a visual show of some response for a domestic audience. People wondering why their sophisticated missiles weren't engaging underscores the success of Israeli suppression tactics.
What about Iran's claim they shot down 2 Israeli F-35s? That'd be huge, if true.
Sources state very clearly. So far, absolutely no credible evidence supports that claim. All that's emerged is an uncorroborated, allegedly fake, computer-generated AI image online. Looks like parts from different jets combined. Strongly suggests it's not real.
Okay, so based on these sources, that claim isn't backed by evidence. Let's talk BDA from the Israeli side. Their claims, intel reports, what did they hit?
Satellite and radar images reportedly came in pretty quick after the strikes. Not much cloud cover, helped with rapid assessment. According to initial info, Israeli claims, around 40 Iranian air defense systems reportedly destroyed or severely damaged since the start. Radars, missile launchers.
40 systems. That number seems to align with what you'd expect from coordinated ground sabotage on SAMs and air sea-aid missions on radars. Suggests those tactics worked.
It certainly does, based on their numbers. Sources also report on targeting Iranian leadership, scientists. Initial intel suggested about 25 nuclear scientists were targeted. At least 6 reportedly killed.
6 nuclear scientists, wow.
And crucially, their entire high-level leadership structure reportedly targeted. At least 30 senior Iranian commanders reported killed so far.
30 senior commanders, plus scientists. That's a major decapitation strike, isn't it? What's the goal there, according to sources?
It's a massive blow to their command and control. And sources note Iran themselves confirmed deaths of some high-value leaders. Commander of the Revolutionary Guard, military chief of staff. Lends some weight to Israeli claims. The assessment presented is this specific targeting was meant to create a significant leadership vacuum, make it much harder for Iran to organize quick, coordinated, effective retaliation. Disrupts their ability to make decisions, issue orders fast.
What about their ballistic missiles? Those launchers were reportedly a target of that urban drone base phase, evidence they were hit.
Israel reportedly released multiple videos, claim they show Iran's ballistic missile launchers getting destroyed. Some apparently by their own ground operators during or after being targeted. Sources suggest this could explain an anomaly. Iran reportedly fired its 150 missiles at Israel throughout the day, multiple separate volleys, not the typical doctrine of firing them all at once in a coordinated barrage.
Why would that be?
Well, if their ground operators, commanders were being targeted, eliminated while trying to prep or launch missiles, it would severely disrupt normal firing procedures, spread the launches out over time.
That makes sense. If the crews are being hit, it slows down a mass volley, and the airbase is hit.
Yeah.
You mentioned satellite imagery analysis.
Yes. Detailed satellite analysis of key Iranian air bases, specifically Hamadan and Tabriz, reported in the sources. What was seen gives visual confirmation, allows damage assessment.
What did imagery show at places like Hamadan? IDF reportedly claimed it was completely destroyed.
Sources offer a more nuanced view than completely destroyed, suggests maybe surgical-type destruction. Imagery reportedly showed significant damage. Cratered runways.
Which makes them unusable. For a while.
Definitely unusable for flight ops for a period. But sources note cratered runways, while disruptive, can usually be repaired relatively quickly by capable military engineers.
So maybe not leveled, but functionally offline for aircraft.
Precisely. More significantly, imagery reportedly showed clear evidence of penetration of hardened aircraft shelters, hangars, signs of likely internal detonations.
Ah, that's worse.
That type of damage effectively grounds any aircraft inside, takes those key structures out of action much longer. Sources highlight the precision targeting, multiple hits on hardened structures, direct impacts on runways.
Precision targeting. Seems like a recurring theme here, from the spikes to the air campaign. Okay, let's look at Iran's claims. Casualties, their damage assessment.
Well, as we said, they claimed shooting down 2 F-35s, but sources show no credible evidence. Regarding casualties from Israeli attacks, Iran confirmed the high-value leadership deaths we discussed, claimed a total of 78 people killed, over 320 wounded.
Okay.
Crucially, Iran stated the majority of these casualties were civilians.
So Iran is explicitly reporting civilian casualties. Ties back to that reported targeting of residential buildings in Tehran, maybe.
Yes, that's the claim presented in the sources regarding the casualty breakdown.
Now, Iran's retaliation strikes against Israel. What do the sources say about how and where Iran responded?
Sources point out something significant about Iran's targets in retaliation. They reportedly targeted Israel's population centers, residential areas.
Population centers.
Yeah. The source's assessment is this constitutes an escalation compared to past retaliatory attacks from Iran or its proxies. Those usually focused on military bases or specific facilities in less populated areas.
So the type of target changed. Suggests maybe a shift in intent, willingness to hit civilians.
It's presented that way. Reports mention a few apartment buildings in Israel were hit by Iranian munitions, and then later volley, Israel's military HQ, the Kiryat, their Pentagon, basically was reportedly struck.
The Kiryat hit. How bad?
A war correspondent on the ground is quoted describing damage there as an entire block nearly completely destroyed, wiped off the map.
Wow. An entire block near their military HQ wiped off the map suggests significant damage to a critical command center. What about the volume of missiles Iran fired?
Sources say Iran fired 150 ballistic missiles total. This volume is described as similar to or consistent with past attacks Iran has conducted against Israel.
So quantity wasn't necessarily unprecedented, but maybe the timing of volleys the targets were. How effective was Israel's defense against 150 missiles?
Video evidence reported shows many missiles were indeed intercepted by Israel's layered air defense systems, Iron Dome, Patriot, others.
Right.
But sources report, despite intercepts, at least 7 ballistic missiles managed to avoid air defense, hit the ground, impacted targets in Israel.
7 missiles getting through. Even with Israel's defenses, that's not nothing.
No, it's not. And sources draw contrast. In the past, Iran struggled hitting relatively small, defined targets like a military base with ballistic missiles.
Right.
But hitting an entire city, a broad population center, much larger target, increases likelihood of impacts even if precision isn't great.
Good point. Even if not aiming for a specific building, targeting the urban area means something is more likely to get hit. Casualties in Israel.
According to Israeli officials cited, at least 3 Israeli citizens reportedly killed, over 40 people wounded by the Iranian strikes.
So both sides took casualties, significant damage. But based on the source's personal view presented, the strategic impact on Iran's military seems maybe more significant compared to damage on Israel so far, according to that assessment.
That is the assessment offered in the source's personal view that Iran has, as yet, been unable to inflict the same level of strategic blows compared to what they've reportedly received. Though, as sources also note, this is incredibly dynamic. Could change tomorrow.
One thing sources found surprising, almost shocking, silence from Iran's proxies.
Yes, that observation is made. Noted as surprising how little, maybe even no, observed activity or communication came from major Iranian proxy groups, Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon.
They usually pipe up.
Historically, they launch attacks on Israel in similar situations, heightened tension between Israel and Iran. Their relative silence during this major exchange is highlighted as unusual.
It is curious, suggests restraint, disruption. Maybe a strategic decision we don't know about yet. Let's look at broader escalation's implications. One big one noted, Israel targeting Iran's economic sector.
Yes, sources report Israel began hitting targets related to Iran's oil fields, oil infrastructure, presented as a new type of target, something they reportedly haven't done in past exchanges.
Why?
Sources connected directly to the earlier point about Iran targeting Israeli population centers. Suggests this economic targeting is an escalation Israel said they'd undertake if their civilian areas were hit.
So hitting residential buildings triggered hitting oil fields, tit-for-tat escalation into economics.
That's the suggested linkage and reason for that specific escalation in targeting.
Yeah.
Moves the conflict beyond just military on military to impacting the country's economic engine.
And underlying Israel's actions, especially targeting nuclear sites like Natanz, is the Begin doctrine.
Correct. Sources highlight this as foundational Israeli policy. The Begin doctrine, presented as Israel's stated principle not to allow an enemy state to get nuclear weapons capabilities.
They cite past actions.
Yeah, like the 2007 bombing of Syria's suspected nuclear reactor. And now, targeting Iran's nuclear sites as part of this operation frames the action within a long-standing policy against existential threats.
This whole deep dive really underscores how drone warfare is evolving fast, becoming critical. Sources mention effectiveness in Russia's conflict, now Iran, within weeks.
Yes, that observation is made explicitly. Sources suggest this might represent a massive change in warfare. Cheap, numerous adaptable drones, especially integrated with ground sabotage or novel launch methods, proving incredibly effective.
Which leads to the question.
Raising the sources. What's the U.S. military, particularly the Army, doing to adapt to this obvious shift? There's also mention of previous content discussing U.S. recon teams reportedly planning to use kamikaze drones against potential adversaries like China,
Right.
and linking past reports of mysterious drone sightings near U.S. bases. Maybe they were actually training ops, specifically designed to learn how to defeat this very type of drone attack.
So the threat isn't just theoretical, actively planned for, maybe simulated by a major power.
That's the connection sources draw, linking observed effectiveness in real conflicts to existing U.S. strategic planning, potential defensive training, suggests it's taken very seriously. And on the defensive side, Israel seems to have done well against Iran's drones, targeting Israel specifically.
Sources claim Israel's been remarkably effective intercepting incoming Iranian drones, so they shot down more than got through. 0 drones penetrated Israeli airspace to date.
Yes, that's the claim presented regarding drone interceptions. They also detail some methods reportedly used. Mix of high-tech and surprisingly low-tech.
Like what?
Like using helicopters with 30mm guns. Relatively inexpensive, effective way to down incoming drones compared to firing expensive interceptor missiles. Shows a practical approach to counter drone ops.
Okay, given the scale, complexity, deep ground ops, massive airstrikes, big damage, the obvious question discussed in sources, what about the U.S., their response, potential role going forward?
So far, according to sources, primary U.S. response strictly focused on helping defensively, actively helping Israel shoot down Iran's incoming ballistic missiles and drones.
What specific U.S. assets are involved in that defense, according to sources?
Several key ones mentioned. 2 U.S. naval destroyers positioned for missile intercepts. Multiple American Patriot missile batteries, advanced surface-to-air system reportedly moved into the region recently. And high-P air launchers.
Hike.
Terminal high-altitude area defense. Another sophisticated U.S. system intercepts ballistic missiles higher up.
And sources link this to something we discussed before.
Yes. Speculation raised that this big need for missile interceptors in the Middle East could explain that report from weeks ago. U.S. diverting some 20,000 interceptors meant for Ukraine to U.S. troops and assets in the Middle East instead, suggests reprioritization based on the threat here.
Interesting connection. So U.S. Navy land-based missile defense actively intercepting, and U.S. fighter jets patrolling too, right?
Correct. American fighters reportedly on station, actively patrolling skies in the region. While involved in defensive intercepts, primary role stated here is protecting U.S. troops, facilities from potential Iranian or proxy attacks.
But beyond defense, sources report something huge. Israel reportedly asked the U.S. to join the war offensively.
Yes, that's a key piece highlighted. Israel formally asked the U.S. to directly join the conflict to help eliminate Iran's nuclear program.
Why would Israel need the U.S. for that? After such a big operation themselves, don't they have the capability?
Sources explain a key reason. Israel reportedly lacks the specific military hardware needed to effectively destroy Iran's deepest, most fortified nuclear sites.
Like what hardware?
Specifically, very large, specialized bunker buster bombs, like the 30,000-pound GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator, and the large bomber aircraft needed to deliver such massive munitions effectively against deeply buried targets.
And Iran's most problematic site is where?
Sources highlight the Fordo nuclear enrichment site, prime example, reportedly built deep inside a mountain, buried underground. Extremely difficult, maybe impossible, to destroy with standard bombs or even the biggest ones Israel has now.
So Israel can hit surface sites, shallower ones, but can't reach Fordo. But the U.S. can?
That's what sources state. U.S. reportedly has both the required huge bunker busters and the large bombers B-2s, B-52s needed to carry them. And crucially, these U.S. assets are reportedly within flying distance of Iran.
This is where the conversation in the sources gets into the arguments for potential U.S. offensive involvement.
Right. One major argument presented, completing the mission, the thinking. If the Israeli op stops now and Iran's deep underground sites like Fordo are still intact, functional, the whole operation, despite its scale, could be seen as a long-term failure in preventing Iran from eventually getting nukes.
Right.
Eliminating the program entirely, especially deep sites, presented as necessary to address both immediate threat, Iran making a rapid sprint for weapon, and the intermediate long-term threat of continued nuclear development.
So just degrading accessible parts isn't enough if the core protected program is still underground?
Exactly. Another argument, just the additional military reach and scale the U.S. provides. Adding full U.S. military might bring significantly more power, resources, specialized capabilities against Iran.
And a political dimension, too.
Yes. Sources suggest direct U.S. involvement could provide political and international cover for Israel. With the U.S. directly participating, might help keep the international community at bay somewhat. potentially alleviate timeline pressure Israel sometimes faced in past conflicts, like Gaza or Lebanon, where there were strong international calls for quick ceasefire or conclusion. U.S. involvement might lend more perceived legitimacy by time for a longer campaign against the nuclear program.
So U.S. involvement could shield Israel from some international pressure, give them space for a more thorough job.
That's one potential strategic advantage raised, and another argument presented. Quite tactical, strategic. The timing for U.S. involvement might actually be optimal right now.
Why now, when things are so tense?
Sources argue precisely because Israeli strikes ground sabotage, CA already significantly weakened Iran's air defense network. As shown by the lack of effective missile response, the visual of ineffective flak. This is potentially the lowest risk time for heavy U.S. bombers to fly overhead and successfully hit those deep, hardened targets like Fordo, without facing significant threat of being shot down.
Makes sense. If air defense is already degraded, a high-value target like a bomber faces less risk.
That's the reasoning. Argued this creates a potential strategic political opening for President Trump. If risk to U.S. assets is lower now than in years, and the goal is preventing an Iranian bomb, then stopping now, leaving Fordo intact, could mean just facing the same problem, maybe under worse conditions later.
So the current weakened state of Iran's air defense potentially creates a temporary window, where a strike on deep sites is relatively lower risk than maybe even a week ago.
That's the assessment presented. And this situation is reportedly leading some powerful U.S. voices to strongly push for direct U.S. involvement.
Like Senator Lindsey Graham, mentioned in sources as being very vocal.
Yes. Senator Graham highlighted as prominent figure strongly advocating for President Trump to go all in. Sources quote him pushing for U.S. not just to provide the bunker busters, but if necessary, to fly with Israel.
Fly with Israel. Meaning U.S. pilots flying missions alongside Israeli Air Force. Direct offensive strikes.
That's certainly how sources interpret his statements, suggesting direct operational partnership in the air. He stresses, in his view, worst outcome is Iranian nuclear program, especially deep sites, surviving after all this. Links this to broader geopolitical messaging. Finishing the job with Iran sends strong signal to adversaries, Russia, China, terrorist groups that U.S. is serious about red lines, will act decisively.
So clear, strong advocacy for direct offensive U.S. military action from some quarters.
Yeah, absolutely. But crucial to note, as sources do, there are also very strong, powerful voices arguing against any involvement at all within the U.S. government policy circles.
So definitely not unanimous, not a done deal in the U.S. government.
It's far from it. Presented as a live, intense debate. Regarding President Trump's public stance, sources report official position is U.S. not currently involved offensively, but when asked directly about the possibility, he reportedly stated, "It's possible we could get involved."
It's possible we could get involved. That's not a definitive no, is it?
No, quite the opposite.
Yeah.
Sources suggest this public comment could be deliberate negotiating tactic. Pressure Iran, signal direct U.S. intervention is real possibility if Iran doesn't back down or change behavior. Or could genuinely mean direct offensive involvement is still actively considered, not ruled out at highest levels.
Okay.
Sources' overall assessment of the U.S. situation, based on these factors, is quite striking. They assess this is the most likely time in the last 10, 20, maybe more years that the U.S. could carry out military action against Iran.
Wow, that's a significant assessment.
It is. And they go further, stating, "It is not unlikely that the United States is engaged in direct military action with Iran within the next week, based on reports, analysis available to them." Suggests this isn't just theoretical debate, presented as potential near-term reality.
This really paints a picture of a situation far from resolved, potential to escalate dramatically. Sounds like both Israel and Iran might be settling in for a longer conflict than just a brief exchange.
That's the assessment presented. Really looks like both Israel and Iran are digging in for what could be a long fight, preparing for sustained conflict, not just a single punitive exchange.
What signs point to a potentially long engagement, according to sources?
From the Iranian side, sources note observed decrease in missiles fired day over day after the initial big barrage, but strong caution against immediately assuming this means Iran's running low on munitions.
Right.
Draw a parallel to how similar observed reductions in Russian missile strikes early in Ukraine war were widely misinterpreted in the West as Russia running out, only for Russia to continue strikes later.
Right. Jumping to conclusions about capabilities from short-term observations can be misleading.
Exactly.
Okay.
Sources state, based on intel assessments, Iran believed to have yet to tap into quite a few underground facilities, holding significant quantities of missiles, Drones, especially larger, longer-range munitions, suggest substantial reserves beyond what's been fired.
So visible strikes might not show the full extent of Iran's capabilities or inventory, might have much more hidden.
That's the explicit warning from sources. Don't jump to conclusions about Iran's overall capabilities based on just observable strikes over a few days.
What about from the Israeli side? Messaging from leadership suggesting they're prepping for prolonged conflict, difficult period.
Yes, sources share excerpts from a significant statement by the IDF Chief of General Staff to the people as Israel. Described the operation termed Operation Rising Lion as historic, unprecedented, framed as conducted against an existential threat Iran reportedly built.
Using terms like historic, unprecedented, existential threat certainly elevates the significance for the Israeli public.
Absolutely. He emphasized defending the home front, acknowledged very directly there will be difficult moments ahead, a price will be paid. Also stressed, no such thing as complete protection, despite Israel using its finest defense systems, promised retaliation against anyone harming Israel.
That kind of messaging sounds like preparing the public. Potential ongoing impacts, difficulties, maybe casualties?
It does. Manages expectations, calls for public resolve, also noted they're currently in a multi-front war, explicitly mentioned continuing ops in Gaza alongside these big strikes against Iran, highlights the complex strategic environment Israel's navigating.
And he spoke about resilience, spirit of the Israeli people.
Yes. Statement highlighted resilience, unity, stability, faith of the people in what he called decisive moments, framing this period as the moment we are in now, and is saying they're a life-seeking nation, but must be ready for difficult decisions, fight to ensure future, freedom, concluded with the powerful phrase, like a lion, the people rise.
That kind of direct, almost Churchillian messaging from military leadership definitely suggests they're framing this as significant, potentially lengthy struggle. Requires deep public resolve, unity.
It does. Combined with the assessment, Iran still has significant untapped military resources hidden away. Strongly points towards both sides potentially settling in for something more prolonged, difficult than just a rapid exchange of strikes.
So as we wrap things up on this incredibly detailed deep dive, wow, we've navigated multiple layers of complexity. From covert, months-long ground sabotage using disguised vehicles, urban bases deep inside Iran.
Right, to the massive coordinated air campaign, hundreds of jets, over 100 targets, the battle damage assessment on both sides, including significant losses to Iranian leadership, strikes on infrastructure, reportedly civilian areas.
The observed ineffectiveness of parts of Iran's defense.
Yeah, and that looming shadow of potential direct U.S. military involvement to eliminate Iran's deeply buried nuclear program.
It's a situation clearly evolving rapidly, driven by incredibly detailed long-term planning, execution on one side.
And resulting in significant challenges, escalations from the other. The reports we looked at highlight not just high-tech capabilities, modern air power, missile defense, but also the innovative, arguably unprecedented use of tactics. Weaponized transportation systems, embedded urban attack bases.
All against that backdrop of clear strategic goals, preventing nuclear capability, targeting core command structure.
And what truly stands out is how quickly things shifted, how the very nature of warfare seems to be adapting in real time, incorporating novel tactics alongside traditional military force.
What's fascinating here, and I think this is a crucial takeaway, is how these events show both the precision and scale possible with advanced military capabilities and the disruptive effectiveness of relatively lower tech but highly coordinated covert operations happening simultaneously, paving the way.
A blend of old and new, deployed in startling new ways.
It makes you really wonder about the future. Defense, intelligence, international security. In a world where vehicles become weapons, bases can appear inside cities.
This really does raise an important question for you, the listener, to consider. Given the layers of covert action, overt military force, clear targeting of critical infrastructure, leadership we discussed, this deep dive shows conflict evolving in unprecedented ways.
So what does it mean?
What does this mean for the future of deterrence? How do you deter an adversary who can build a drone base in your capital? Or even, what does it mean for warfare itself, when transportation systems become weapons and precision attacks strike deep inside densely populated cities?
That's definitely something profound to think about long after our conversation ends. And on that note,
we encourage you to stay curious. Keep those questions coming as you continue to learn and process this incredibly complex information unfolding in the world.
Until next time, keep unpacking.
And make sure you subscribe to the Deep Research Podcast to keep getting these deep dives into the stories that matter.